Time to look forward. Now let's see what we can do again to think about the future. Again, ask the question, how do we discern the future, but doing it in the context of what we've already talked about. So one of the challenges we face when we try to think about the future is that the Empire era is still very strong in our minds. And I want to share something that I'll go into a little bit more when we get into, not tonight, but in the tools for the journey, looking at comparing between the Empire era and the Planetary era, looking at consciousness and communications. So in the Empire era, communications and thinking were very strongly focused in the linguistic parts of the brain because we were so heavily dependent on language. Those were the tools we had, those were the tools we used, and there's wonderful, wonderful stuff about that. But there are also some very real limitations. In the Planetary era, we get to be linguistic and visual and kinesthetic. We can tap into all of the various different parts of not only our brains, but our beings, really. And it isn't as if the linguistic part goes away, but it loses its monopoly. And the places where it's no longer strong, other parts of our brain are able to come in and participate. And one place here, one of the things that language does is that it forces us into categorical thinking. Words are, after all, labels on categories. And that leads to a lot of polarization, frequently unnecessary polarization. As we have the support of things that are more visual, I put pie charts up here, but gradients, continuous variation, there are all kinds of ways that visually and kinesthetically we can represent things that are not pure categories. And that actually winds up being a great help when we're trying to deal with some of the issues that we face. Language, again, is linear. And in the Empire era, they very much saw things in vertical hierarchies. One single hierarchy. The Middle Ages had their great chain of being. In the Planetary era, things become multidimensional. You are not part of just one hierarchy. You may be in something that could sort of look like a hierarchy here, but you're in a different role over there, and in the other place there's no hierarchy at all, and that's just the social dimension. Because of this, in the Empire era, life was viewed as a power struggle, and it was always very close to the surface, even if it wasn't the most prominent thing. And my sense is that as we move into the Planetary era, life is going to be viewed as discoveries to make, puzzles to solve, and mysteries to live. Some of which will involve power struggles. Because the theme here is that the Empire era stuff never totally goes away. It just gets included, and in the process of being included in this broader consciousness, it gets transformed. Likewise, the Empire era was moralistic, absolute, and in its justice was very much redress, backward-looking, eye for an eye kind of orientation. Whereas in the Planetary era, I suspect, will be much more systemic and contextual and forward-looking, looking towards healing rather than backward-looking towards redress. So that's just to give you some flavor. We'll get into that in a further foundation stone, but just some flavor of the way in which the difference in thinking isn't just a difference between, yeah, in the Empire era they like to kill people and now we're nice to each other. It's much deeper than that, and it is part of my daily life. I find myself, even though I've been immersed in this for a long time, I catch myself doing all of these Empire era thinking things all the time. I'm not saying you will, but I do. So the Empire era is still strong in our minds. It influences, all of our language basically comes out of the Empire era, and so much of our belief systems. Ideas about human nature and how life works, we've inherited all that from the Empire era. And because of this, it leads to all sorts of misunderstandings. We try to impose on what is really going on around us a set of ideas that really doesn't fit anymore. Also, thinking about the future, we know there's going to be surprises of all sorts. I mean, there always are. Truth is stranger than fiction. Some things will turn out better, some things will turn out worse. And there's certainly going to be unexpected things that'll come up over the horizon. Some of them we won't like, some of them we will. Nevertheless, I'm hopeful that with a systems perspective, the big picture is discernible. Just as if we understand atomic physics, we can understand why you go from ice to water to steam. So, planetary era. Before I go any further, I need to deal with something that I kind of began with. I've been talking about three characteristics looking back at the last 500 years. Most of that time wasn't after we crossed the one Earth threshold. We did. And now, how is that limits to growth challenge going to impact all of that? Well, I want to really get into this and ask, how bad could it get? We can certainly have, we already have, species out of the limits to growth crisis, but also out of our inheritance with the Empire era. We have species extinction and food scarcity, and environmental refugees, storm damage, economic disruption. All of those are going on, and I will say personally that I would not be surprised if it gets worse before it gets better over the coming decades. When I say I'm encouraged about the future, it's not because I don't see these things and see the potential for them already in the pipeline. But it can get worse. We could have massive social breakdown with huge loss of human life. It's possible. One of the things that I'm not invoking this, but I will say, is that if we lost 90% of the current human population, we would be back at a population level that humanity was at in 1700. Losing 90% of the population, we're just back to 1700 in that sense. Lots of other things go wrong, but one of the things that happens when you have this is that humans won't go down calmly. There's huge, nasty, negative impacts on the environment in the process of something like that. And then we could get to the point where if you burned all the fossil fuels and got all of that into the atmosphere, you can raise the Earth's temperature enough so that the tropics become uninhabitable for warm-blooded creatures, which is a huge change. And it's physically possible. And, we could do that. And at the far end, with a lifeless Earth, I see discussed two possibilities. There may very well be others. There's nuclear winter, where there's still a huge number of nuclear warheads around. We don't think about it much, but they're still there. And there are enough of them there to make a lifeless Earth, basically. And if we put enough greenhouse gases, I need to put the right caveats in here. Venus has surface temperature of a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit. You have molten lead, basically, on the surface of Venus because it has a very thick carbon dioxide atmosphere. Super greenhouse gas effect. The best understandings at this point that I can get from the science is that we're not at a point where we can humanly do that yet to the Earth. But if you want to think about kind of the very worst outcomes, it's down in that quadrant. So having cheered you all up, let me say that the thing that I find with this is that when you step back from, oh my God, how awful that is, and start asking, well, what can we do about it? the strategies that one would apply, regardless of how far along you're dealing with things, actually wind up being quite similar. Because we're back to the place where there are no environmental problems, there are only environmental symptoms of human problems. And if we really want to be able to minimize this stuff and move in a more positive direction, in some sense we don't need to know how bad it could be, because the strategies that we need to adopt are all basically the same thing. And my sense is that it's already happening, and we will see more of it. The more we feel the pressure from the Limits to Growth Challenge, the more that spurs innovation of all kinds, social innovations as well as technological innovations, that we need to be able to overcome the issues that we're dealing with. Successful innovations will use succession species strategies. The people who try to innovate using the pioneer strategies are going to find that it just isn't going to work the same way that it used to. So that means high levels of diversity, high levels of symbiosis. Communications will continue to be prioritized. Those high levels of cell phone subscriptions illustrate the way in which people without flush toilets are choosing to get a cell phone instead. And you can say, oh, well, that's just good marketing. No, actually, in a lot of places, getting that cell phone makes a really big difference to people's lives. But sustainability needs to be added in as a fourth characteristic. We've just been talking about three as we've moved along, but we need that fourth one. So what about the changes to come? My sense, you were asking earlier about the economic stuff. We're in the midst of a very deep change. And changes are likely to come in every facet of culture. Economics, governance, legal systems, healthcare, education, religion, warfare. I want to make the point with warfare that my sense, as I look at the long-term statistics, warfare is winding down. I think we are within 2 generations of ending warfare as an institution. And you might say, 2 generations, that takes a long time. We've been at it for 5,000 years. When I think of all of the ancestors whose shoulders I stand on, who would love to be at the point that they were only 2 generations away, that brings up in me a sense of how important it is to seize the moment and keep moving that forward. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's only 1 generation. And it's all going to depend on what we do. We already know that there's resistance, and there will continue to be resistance. And I would say I see a lot of this resistance coming from people who were raised in Empire-era values, still believe in them, still believe that they're the right thing. They're trying as best they can to save us from the awful changes that are happening. But they're on the wrong side of history. They're now like pioneer species struggling against the succession species, and their apparent successes that come up and down won't last. On the other hand, all the stuff from the past is going to continue in one way or another. We had this image before of the way in which the things from the tribal era continued in the Empire era. Well, here's the next transition. And in the same way, for instance, kinship lost its unique role when the Empire era came along. Well, now hierarchy is losing its unique role as the Planetary Era comes along. And in the same way, speech lost its unique role when writing came, and now writing is losing its unique role. It's getting less attention share because of all of the other ways that we get to communicate. So, Planetary Era characteristics as I see them. So I see it as a cultural system domain characterized by sustainability. It's going to have to be. We either do it or we fail. Diversity, and not just of occupations, but diversity in all kinds of ways. In fact, in order to really get into the Planetary Era, we have to be able to treat diversity as an asset. And that means men and women, all kinds of different ages, different psychological types. We need to be able to realize that when we work those in collaboration, we get something that is actually much stronger than if we treat diversity as a problem. Self-organization, talked a bunch about that, and connectivity. There will be other characteristics too, but this gives you a sense of things. Nothing on this list is actually all that controversial. I'm not aiming towards exotica. I'm aiming towards things that once you get it, it's kind of duh. But then you look around and you realize that most of the people around you don't see it that way. I think the planetary era will be at ease with and foster learning, which is innovation, which is learning, which is the ability to change. And I think that in a paradoxical way, when we as a culture are truly at home and at ease with learning and change, we will have moved into a new stable era. And my sense is that human relationships at all scales will be fundamentally consensual. Now, as part of that, people will get together in groups and decide that, you know, the best way to organize this is to have a certain amount of functional hierarchy. We actually need a fire chief in order to get this to work. That's fine, but that's a consensual hierarchy. Nobody's being forced into that. There are times when operationally hierarchy makes sense. And that's a way in which something from the Empire era gets continued but transformed in the planetary era.